right, everyone. Thank you all for being back on time. We're going to start the second session for today's Bachelor Tourism Thesis Day. We're going to start with Marc, then we'll go on to Natasha, and then Britt. So as you know, you have 15 minutes for presentations, 10 minutes for questions. Sorry?
Is there a clock?
There will be a clock and it will be me. Okay. So I will say when you have 5 minutes left and when you have 2 minutes left. Yeah, so just look for my little hand. Yeah? All right. So when you're ready.
Okay. Hello everyone. I'm Marc. Thank you so much for coming out to hear about my thesis. I'm gonna tell you about positive pilgrimage psychology, and together we're gonna explore spiritual travel and its contribution to well-being. So today I'll briefly go through literature, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, and that's it. So let's start right with literature. It's a lot, and so I reviewed 5 concepts in my literature review, and I'm going to briefly explain them to you and outline them. I don't have a lot of time to go into them deeply, so fasten your seatbelts. We're going quick. So first of all, pilgrimage, of course. Maybe you're thinking it's an old phenomenon where people walk 500 kilometers to go to an old temple or something, but I'm going to show you today that that is not necessarily the case. The definition that I will be using for pilgrimage is a journey that is both physical, so you are actually traveling, but it's also an inner journey where you look for meaning, truth. It can be look for God or just personal significance. So it's more than just, it doesn't have to be the old way. Then we're talking about well-being as the biggest concept. Basically, it's categorized into 2 different categories. So the first is subjective well-being, which I operationalized as life satisfaction. So I'm testing people's life satisfaction, as well as psychological well-being. Maybe you have never heard of that, but I'm sure you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so psychological well-being is strongly related to self-actualization, which is top of the hierarchy, as you probably learned. These are 6 components that help us know and measure psychological well-being. Then we're talking about peak experiences. Maybe you've never heard of that. A peak experience is basically a high, intensive, extraordinary and transformative experience. So it's different than normal experiences or moments. And joy and happiness are emotions that are strongly involved in them. So they are basically peak experiences in your life. They are not just everyday experiences. Next one is a difficult one. It's a psychological concept called self-transcendence. It's basically transcending yourself, your own wishes or desires, in favor or service to others or to God or another being. So it's basically putting yourself second. So you're going beyond your own desires or wishes. Then finally we have spirituality. There's many conceptualizations of that, but some of them I've used as a human response to God's gracious call to a relationship with Himself, or a subjective experience of the sacred. So it's really a subjective, personal idea of spirituality. So why is this relevant? The combination of these concepts is very unique in both psychological as well as tourism literature. So it's very interesting to study how they interrelate and how they predict each other. And so the main research question for this research is, how does pilgrimage as a peak experience, so as an intense experience, contribute to people's well-being? So then brings me to this. This is not the alien from Toy Story. This is the interrelationship between peak experience, self-transcendence, and spirituality. So this, how they interrelate is what I'm researching, and how they, as interrelations, contribute to well-being. So both psychological as well as subjective, and as a whole. I'm looking at personality as a control variable. So as a control variable to see if it's actually these things that predict well-being. Okay, so that's it for the literature. Brings me to methods. Briefly going through this, I'll go through data collection, population and sample, and the data analysis. First of all, so I did for data collection an online survey in which I measured all the components that I just outlined to you by these guys. So I used skills that were already existing, which allows for both validity, reliability, and comparability. And also I used I tested for program characteristics to see how how the pilgrimage can impact the other factors. So for population ensemble, I looked at a global movement of Christians young Christians called Youth with a Mission. I will be referring to it as YWAM. Their motto is to know God and make Him known. So you can and they travel to different countries to do exactly this. So there's self-reflection in it, but there's also sharing of the fact that God loves people. So they will do both these things. So that's my pilgrimage sample. I got 218 ex-pilgrims fill out my online survey. 2 out of 3 were female, and 75% of them were younger than 32. So that shows this is a quite young sample. This is a quick graph of where they're from. 27 countries. So yeah, these are all the places. And they travel to these countries. So each dot represents one country. In total there's 72 countries that the people travel to for their pilgrimage. Data analysis. So I analyzed the data I just outlined to you. Both quantitative as well as qualitative data were involved. So firstly, qualitative, I used some tools in SPSS to just measure all the measurements that I just outlined to you. So these are them. For qualitative data, there was especially one question in my survey that asked people to share their personal experience and how it contributed to their life. So I used thematic coding to analyze that question. Okay, this brings me to the results. There are a lot of results, and if I would share them all, it would probably take an hour. So I don't want to get you walking out today like this. So I'll briefly go through some quantitative and some qualitative results. First, quantitative, the statistical analysis. The findings are one of them is a structural equation model. So that became this. Have a good look at this really quick. I know this makes a lot of sense. So these are the concepts that you can see. These are the measurements. And this is all the arrows are how they interrelate. But I cannot go into this too much because you will get this. So I've taken a snapshot of this big model you just had before with the most important finding of my research, which is the relationship between peak experience, so pilgrimage as a peak experience, and well-being. I found that's very interesting that peak experience relates to well-being indirectly through mediation, it's called. Mediation through self-transcendence, then spirituality, then well-being. So this relation is not necessarily significant, this direct one, but indirectly there's definitely a significant relationship. So this means that the pilgrimage that I tested as a peak experience contributes to well-being, but through self-transcendence and spirituality. Side note is also that both self-transcendence as well as spirituality also predict well-being on themselves. So these 2 lines are also significant. So this is the main quantitative finding. We'll quickly go through qualitative. So like I said, there was one open question. It was an optional question, and luckily a lot of people were willing to fill something out there. So I got lots of responses there. The themes that came out of this thematic coding that I did here were these 5. I'll quickly go through some of them for you, and also show some extracts to show how, so you also get a better understanding of these definitions. So for peak experience, a sub-theme that was very apparent was that it's life-changing. For many people, the pilgrimage was life-changing. So this person said, won't ever be the same. Life-changing, YWAM changed my life. So this is clear that there were also other indicators that the pilgrimage that I tested for was really a peak experience. Then self-transcendence, maybe you can get a bit better grasp on this idea. So people said it was an opportunity for me to choose God 100% with my life. So that means you transcend, you go to a bigger cause that you want to aim for in your life. This person said this is a very good one. This is a best example of self-transcendence. I saw it as an opportunity and something I get stuff out of myself, so to consume. But then they realized that it's actually giving away. So giving away to others is what really gave them the most satisfaction and satisfaction in life. So that's self-transcendence clearly. Spirituality, there were 4 sub-themes. They were these. And so some of them, so healing, for example, someone got healed from a clinical depression and eating disorder through their pilgrimage. So this is an example of spirituality. I love Jesus on a much deeper level. Revelation, it was beautiful. Revelation means a really realization of something cool that changed your life. Epiphany is very similar. This is also an indication that spirituality was a big factor in the pilgrimage. Psychological well-being, I cannot go through them all. Here are some quotes. So 5 out of 6 components were actually still found to be true. Character development was unsurprisingly also found to be facilitated by pilgrimage, which is this is a conceptualization of character. Okay, this brings me to discussion. So here's the model again. So what I just showed you is that this relation is indeed significant, and it goes like this, boom, 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 boom. And so I also showed you all the relations separately. So confronting this to the literature, why is this relevant? For well-being, first of all, I showed that the literature also has suggested that both peak experience, self-transcendence, and spirituality individually lead to well-being. So I confirmed these findings, and I also showed that in relation they also contribute to well-being. This I don't have time for now. Then we have contributions to the literature. There are significant contributions for both psychological literature as well as tourism literature. So as I just said, for psychology literature, it's really interesting that the relations, the 3 components that I just showed you, contribute to well-being, but no psychological literature had yet analyzed these relations in combination. So this is a very interesting finding that in combination they can also help predict well-being very well. For tourism more specifically, we can really get a better grasp of the psychological benefits of travel. There's hardly any research on it. There's lots of research that sees how travel makes us happy, but psychological benefits are more like really tangible benefits for your life are not much assessed. So that's for both psychological well-being that I outlined earlier, as well as character development. So the interesting finding that I had. So tourism can also contribute to character development. Limitations, this briefly, my sample is very weird. That means they are from a westernized, educated, industrialized, rich and democratic society. And it's funny with this quote, 12% of the world population is from a weird society, and 95% of my sample was from a weird society. So I basically only represent 12% of the world population. Also, my sample was very spiritual, which can also lead to issues in external validity. Conclusion. So, how does pilgrimage as a peak experience contribute to well-being? So, the answer to my research question is pilgrimage as a peak experience contributes to well-being through self-transcendence and spirituality. So these concepts are also very inherent in that. But because my sample is not my study is cross-sectional and not an experiment, I cannot guarantee you that if you go on a pilgrimage, you will become better. You will get better well-being. So my take-home message for today is: if you really want to know if pilgrimage contributes to your well-being, you should maybe consider consider trying one. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. How was my time?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Marc. We now have 10 minutes for questions and comments, and this is the time that I like to encourage parents, friends, family, fellow students to ask your questions to help him shine.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You started your presentation in describing the travel as a spiritual as well as a physical travel.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
the
sorry.
journey to the well-being, is the physical travel essential?
So for, my 1 second. Here we go. Yeah, this one. So it's I only looked at pilgrimage, and my conceptualization of pilgrimage is that it's both a physical and a inner journey. Because of course we're also studying tourism, so some physical journey is nice to know about. I'm not saying that without physical travel you cannot experience better well-being. I'm sure that, for example, there's lots of research about meditation. For example, meditation you can see as a inner journey because you're sort of figuring out yourself, your body, and how that all works. And there's significant research that shows that that also can contribute to well-being. But because I look at pilgrimage and from a tourism perspective, I'm also considering physical travel because that's inherently part of it.
And as you described, the travel was also almost always abroad to other countries.
Yeah. So as I showed you the one map, the 72 countries were all the so my sample of 218 people traveled to 72 countries for their pilgrimage as part of their pilgrimage. So that was their physical journey. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Anyone else? Timer.
Does the pilgrimage sometimes contribute to a negative well-being, like not
Good
better?
question. That would maybe be more the title of my research is Positive Pilgrimage Psychology, which comes from positive psychology, and positive psychology looks how people can experience going from a normal state of being to a increased state of being. But as you all probably more familiar with, psychology a lot of time looks at how people with like a mental depression or like bad feelings, so like you argue like negative well-being, how they can get to normal. So my aim specific was on how people that are normal can go to better well-being. Personally, I think it's unlikely that people will go from normal to bad, because like I showed, it's more likely that people go from normal to good, but I didn't look at like negative well-being things. Yeah.
Eva, oh, sorry. Yeah. Did you ever go pilgrimage yourself?
Not yet, no. So that's a good question. My sister is actually doing it now, so that's what gave me the main inspiration for it. So my sister, she is currently in the US, in Pennsylvania. She traveled there from Canada, so that's her first physical journey. And then she just came back from Cuba also, so that's where they did their outreach, it's called. So her first part of her pilgrimage was in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. That was her personal reflection and her like her time with God and learning about God and just about all that. And then after that, they're like I said, they're not just consuming but also self-transcending. So for their outreach, they go to Cuba and they really support these people, love on the people, and tell them about Jesus. Yeah. Oh, well, that was.
There were other questions too,
I didn't
so
actually answer your
there was
question.
one
So.
back, and then there was one here, Erwin, and then, yeah.
I did not yet go on a pilgrimage, but I would really like to, especially after my research. Yes.
Did you only focus on Christianity, right?
Yeah, for this research I did, but it's a good question because pilgrimage, you don't have to be religious or Christian for to go on a pilgrimage, because as you can also see, it's as long as you go on a physical journey and an inner journey. So if you're really trying to find truth or meaning or personal significance, that's also a pilgrimage. So you don't have to be Christian. But for my research, I focused on religious pilgrimage because that's the most common by far. And I had to make some decisions because otherwise it becomes really broad, and like also some of the concepts that I use will not be applicable to other research, like I showed in my limitations. Does that answer your question?
Now you say religious pilgrimage, but it can also be from other religions.
Yeah. So like I said, I focused more because it's hard to get too broad. Okay, thanks for your question.
Thank you. It's a very impressive presentation, Mark. I was actually thinking of myself, so I'm not spiritual, and I have some extra kilos, and as you said, I would like to become normal. Maybe it's also something to me. Then I was just wondering about that one. What is actually the relationship of the respondent's profile? I mean, to what extent the background of the people has an impact on those relationships? Does it make sense that, or is it the same equal effect that someone is coming from India and another one is coming from the Netherlands, and then they have very similar results, as you are saying?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I try to account for some of these differences by looking at personality, but that's still psychological. It's not really about background. So there are very interesting findings on how personality influences this relationship, but if you want to know more about that, I recommend you read my report.
I will do.
And apart from personality, there are also other things that I took into account. So, but like I also said, for example, culture or nationality was hard to assess because 95% of my sample was weird.
Okay.
Other things I did look at, if people did other kinds of pilgrimage, or or their education, all kinds of stuff. I looked at that as well, and nothing significant came out of that. So, of course, there's like huge amount of control factors that you can take into account when you look at people's well-being, because there's so many things that influence your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to look at some of them, and nothing really interesting came out apart from the personality.
Okay.
We have time for one last question.
No, I thought there was a question in the back, so I pulled it up.
Okay, is there anything else? No?
Last chance, guys.
Final chance? All right, well, thank you very much, Marc.